Welcome to Suits on Suits. We're your hosts, Quinn and Jared Mayberry. In this episode, we're going to break down depositions, what's the point, settlements, some do's and don'ts, embezzlement, tisk tisk, Mr. Maslow, and theft, specifically theft by deception. Stick around for the discussion.
Yeah, for those following along, this is episode 8 of season 1. In this episode titled Identity Crisis, I think rightly named, Harvey and Lewis work together to find money embezzled from their client. And Mike is tasked with fixing actions taken by a Nepo baby of the CEO of a client. So what do you think?
I like this episode. They were, I thought it was pretty funny and they covered a lot of ground. It was fast moving. It was fast paced. It was quick. I really liked the rise and fall of Harvey and Lewis's relationship in this episode too. Yeah, I agree. They
build it, again. Harvey comes out looking good, but they build it up. You think they're gonna make it work?
Yeah, they got so close.
I know.
And that which is the real will they won't they of the of Suits.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think about Mike being like kind of the mopey emo kid that all the women like ultimately?
I love that for Mike.
Yeah.
I don't know why I hate watching him whine. I feel like he's like...
The whine's working. The whining is working is hard.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I've been a whiner before, but I feel like...
Quinn's Captain Whine.
No, it shouldn't be rewarded. It's annoying. And I think, in particular, whenever it comes to the relationship with him and Harvey, it's like Harvey has had his back time and time again.
Yeah.
Is he the perfect mentor? Probably not. But like, is he incredibly loyal? And has he put his neck out on the line dozens of times in enormous ways?
Yeah.
Yes.
And does he take the beating pretty easily? Yeah, he does.
Yeah, like a champ. And so, I don't know. I don't love Mike's whining.
Yeah, and that it's rewarded. I think the other point, which is kind of interesting, and we talked about earlier in these episodes, did Mike's problem disappear?
Yeah.
Is he done now? Is it almost impossible for them to prove that he isn't a Harvard man?
Hard to say.
Aggrieved Harvard man over here, Glenn Mayberry.
Stolen valor.
Yeah, exactly.
While we're talking about it, I'll point out the absolute biggest Poindextery moment I had during this episode. I was like, whenever they showed the fake Harvard diploma or the real Harvard diploma, the purportedly real Harvard diploma, they got the seal wrong.
Oh, brother. The fact you know that makes me so sad. You're better than this, Quinn.
I know very little about Harvard lore, but you see the seal so much that you're like, anyways.
Well, they probably couldn't. It may be a copyright issue.
Great point. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. I was just like, those bastards got it wrong.
I know. They can say Harvard a bunch, but they can't steal their seal.
Yeah.
Maybe to start, what's the purpose of a deposition versus taking someone on the witness stand?
I guess high level, before you get to trial, you have this process in litigation called discovery.
Yep.
So there are basically two types of discovery. There's written discovery, and then you have depositions.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes to taking somebody's deposition, you're trying to figure out what they are likely to say if this did go to trial and what they know. You could also use this as an opportunity to potentially find other witnesses. Anytime you're doing discovery, you're essentially trying to figure out what the underlying facts of the case are. Yeah. Oftentimes, the opposing side in a lawsuit has more ready access to that information than the party suing them. And so a deposition is just a great way to unearth some of those facts.
That makes sense. So it's fact finding, right?
You're in fact finding. Somebody's giving their sworn testimony about, what happened, and a lawyer's going to ask them questions similar to what we saw in this situation.
One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is the firm's GC was the one sitting there next to the person being deposed. What did you think about that?
Yeah, so we had a potential conflict of interest here. Right. We've addressed this before, but the general counsel for a company represents the company, not individual actors or employees of the company.
Yeah.
So potentially a big conflict issue. Lewis didn't miss the chance to take a jab at the GC saying, you're typically pushing paper, which of course isn't a fair characterization. But in all likelihood, the general counsel wouldn't necessarily be a seasoned litigator.
Yeah.
Their job is to, have this 30,000 foot view of, the legal issues at the company and then contract with the appropriate parties for that matter. So they'd be hiring outside counsel the vast majority of the time. And the even bigger issue is the potential conflict here.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, a 9-figure liability potentially, there are going to be 12 lawyers in that room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lawyer who's incredibly well versed in financial crime.
Yep.
And there's going to be, for a matter this big, there's going to be a seasoned trial lawyer in the room.
Yeah.
What'd you think about the way this deposition played out?
I mean, it was super aggressive. And Lewis was trying to, this is maybe a theme, break the witness.
Attack dog.
Yeah, he was going full force. I mean, look, different strategies have different outcomes, and maybe this was a reasonable strategy under the circumstances. It didn't seem to be.
Yeah. And I'll jump in here and say Lewis directly mentioned this at one point in the episode, at a different point in the episode, but he was like, there are kind of two ways to get results.
Carrot
it's
or
carrot, a stick.
Yeah.
And I'm a stick kind of guy.
And until immediately after the stick doesn't work, and then he puts his tail between it's like, okay, carrot. Yeah, he definitely has a personality, which is like, there's no boldness there. He's just a attack dog until like it's not working.
But he seemed incredibly competent and capable, which is something I always love to see out of Lewis, who's the heel but capable. But
capable heel. What do you think about the fact that he's trying to claim that he wanted to claim that he killed the guy?
So because this is purely fictional, I'm going to lean into the absurdity of it, and I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, I thought it was funny too. I mean, you definitely don't want to take any liability for killing somebody.
He wanted the reputation. He's like, well, would it be all right if I told people?
And then he told people.
So ridiculous. How about the part where the guy asks for water and he says, we don't have any water here. No water for you.
Yeah, he's gonna
cutthroat.
He's taking it to you, man.
The deposition, they're trying to figure out what the second in command here knows about the potential embezzlement.
They think he's actively involved in the embezzlement, or maybe they don't think he's actively involved. It's kind of hard to tell, but they think he knows.
They think he knows what's going on at the very least. As we see sometimes in the show, there's a bit of a blurring of the civil cause of action and the criminal cause of action. We see a tactic that is commonly portrayed on shows whenever it comes to criminal matters and is largely based in reality, where they try and get, you hear about somebody turning state's witness.
Yes, totally.
So they're trying to kind of flip him here. Yeah.
And then they eventually try to flip the personal assistant at one point. I think we're kind of broadening the scope here, because maybe it's time to kind of jump into the embezzlement claim itself. This is the case that the whole episode is built around. The firm's client is Stable Shelters, run by Lucille Jackson. She's the executive director, and she's lost, I think it was like $150 million that was entrusted. Basically, she had a trust of $150 million that she entrusted to an investment advisor to manage the money, which is very smart. Sitting on $150 million in a bank account is a pretty terrible idea.
I mean, just for some quick context, you're talking about 10% returns potentially annually.
Yeah. With,
a smart, but maybe even fairly conservative investment firm.
Yeah.
$15 million a year.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. It would have a material impact on their ability to have an impact in their community.
Absolutely.
So the money's entrusted to Anthony Maslow, who's the head of the investment firm. I don't think we get the name of it, but either way. And then it goes to zero. She has no money. She's got to take out a loan, which is how they start the episode, which is kind of a predatory loan. Harvey and Lewis team up under Jessica's advice to try and solve this mystery. Where did the $150 million go?
Yeah. And so trying to figure out where the money went. And before we dive into a discussion, let's talk about what the elements of embezzlement are. Yeah, so embezzlement's interesting because before
it existed, larceny existed, or theft existed, some form in the common law of stealing another person's property, money, property, whatever. The issue was that if you had entrusted that property or money to someone else, cut against the elements of theft. So they didn't really have a claim. It wasn't theft under the general construct. So they had to come up with this concept of embezzlement. So embezzlement, there are federal statutes kind of covering embezzlement, and there are state statutes covering embezzlement. The federal statutes tend to cover embezzlement by state of state funds. State embezzlement criminal statutes cover, what we would normally think is stealing someone else's property in a private sector construct. So they're probably going to be using some form of the state embezzlement statutes, and each statute's gonna vary. The common cause of action is the fraudulent taking of a personal property by someone to whom it was entrusted. Pretty simple single sentence, but complicated in the nuance of how these words are interpreted.
But so entrusted to the investment firm.
Yes.
And they took it. I mean, we find out later in the episode that it was diverted to different bank accounts in Luxembourg, or no, it was Liechtenstein.
Liechtenstein, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so diverted to, several bank accounts in Liechtenstein and setting up our embezzlement claim.
I think we all know that it is embezzlement if they can find the facts, and the whole episode and the drama is around finding the facts and who was the perpetrator, right? So the interesting thing to me is they kind of juxtaposed Elliot Perkins against Anthony Maslow, as if in the civil claim that's going to matter in terms of getting the money back. Because at one point, after Elliot dies, they try to pin it all on him. Yes, he took the money, he made some fraudulent investments, he stole the money, but it wasn't us, so we're going to give you a settlement of $15 million. What do you think of that?
So you already alluded to this, but the claim's going to be against the investment firm, and they're going to be responsible for it either way. And so, you could bring a claim against both of these people individually, and that might be relevant to collection, but you're bringing a claim against the firm, and so long as the firm is liquid and able to settle that, to pay out that debt, then the firm's going to be on the hook. I
would guess it would be hard in that short of time to create some kind of alternative fact to to make it seem like they got off easy, but they're not going to get off there. It is interesting.
It certainly would matter for the criminal.
Exactly.
In the criminal context, a general element of committing a violation typically is intent.
Yeah.
You could have some sort of imputed liability, or you could be on the hook for somebody else's actions as a co-conspirator. There are other ways to get criminal liability beyond just the person who, actually diverted the money. But generally speaking, if your business partner stole a bunch of money and you had no clue what was happening, you typically wouldn't be liable for that in a criminal sense. And so
they're
trying to tease that out.
Agree with you. I think the thing that you would say is they're going after the individual.
Yeah.
Most likely. Obviously, the firm can have some kind of criminal liability, potentially. It's much murkier, but they're going to go after the individual. And so then they kind of are acting on their own and trying to figure out if someone's liable.
And trying to find the specific bad actor.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. This brings up a point that I wanted to discuss, though. So let's have a quick aside before we return to embezzlement. They talk about not being able to subpoena the evidence. So they can't issue subpoenas to these particular banks. And Lewis, who's the expert at the firm on financial crimes, immediately knows, X number of the big banks in Liechtenstein don't respond to, U.S. subpoenas.
Yep.
And a subpoena would be a common way to go about getting some of this evidence. We were talking about the discovery process. Throughout the discovery process, you'd potentially issue subpoenas. Whether or not these banks have to comply with those subpoenas when they're in a different jurisdiction gets complicated. But that would be the device where, they talked about getting video evidence of the person, the CEO, entering these banks. You could issue a subpoena to those banks, and they may or may not have to comply with turning over that videotape or information on various accounts. And so if it's the United States government issuing those subpoenas as opposed to a private law firm, the consequences probably unsurprisingly can be very different.
Yeah, and their fear, right? It's what force do they perceive to be behind the subpoena? And if they think it's the U.S. government, maybe they quake a little bit. If they think it's a private law firm, maybe they say, we also are balancing our desire to be seen as a very private bank.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, the law firm issuing the subpoena would try and bring down the force of, the U.S. government or potentially some state government to have that subpoena enforced, but a bit different whenever it's coming from a private firm versus the government itself.
So maybe jumping back to the kind of criminal context, which isn't really probably what was happening here because Harvey and Lewis were the ones driving it. I think they were just trying to find a way to resolve getting her money back, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the narrative arc.
That's their goal.
So funny enough, though, embezzlement can also be tried in a very indirect way, which is through the IRS.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So the IRS, is going to argue that any embezzled funds should be treated as revenue for whatever
Yeah.
person or company. It should be added to your tax return as funds received and should be accounted for. And so if you can't necessarily prove an embezzlement claim, like that they stole the money, did they put that money on their books properly in a way that they are paying taxes on it?
And you've got to suspect the answer is no.
The answer is no, right? Because if they're doing the illegal act that they know is illegal, why would they create a paper trail with the IRS? This is actually not an unusual way to go at criminal activity. Can you name another example of this?
Al Capone.
Yeah, that one's, it's funny.
I mean, that's I think the most notorious example of.
Yeah, he's going around town, killing people, stealing money.
Committing all kinds of violent crimes. Purportedly, allegedly. Yeah.
Allegedly. They can't get witnesses to back up these actions. And so instead they go after they go after him for tax evasion.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Makes sense. It would not be the first thing I thought of in this situation.
I guess the way to think about it is if the government can't necessarily make the case or they think it's too hard or they can't get the witnesses for certain financial claims or financial crimes, then they may there is a chance they can utilize the tax code against the criminal.
And so back to the civil claim to receive restitution or to be paid back for this $150 million that was stolen.
Yeah, we
see Harvey and Lewis partnering up. They ultimately find out a combination of their combined guile and knowledge on this topic with all of the information that they're getting from Lola, who's the expert hacker here.
Yes.
We get to the bottom of what's happening and they have some leverage and they enter into the settlement negotiations.
Yes.
Before this, there was some back and forth in settlement negotiations and ultimately what's happening in a settlement. So people are trying to resolve the dispute before it proceeds to trial. Yeah,
they're assessing their relative likelihood of success at trial,
exactly.
The cost of going to trial, and weighing that against, the losses or gains that could be won or lost at trial. Maybe one step aside here. In the middle of this negotiation, the Harvey-Lewis duo is on its back foot, with Lewis taking some bad actions, trying to flip a witness.
Yeah.
And he gets caught. And then, they decide they're going to lower the settlement offer in connection with Lewis, almost using that bad action as a way to lower it.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts to that?
So this is a tricky situation. Basically, incorporating new bad information and then lowering the settlement as a result makes sense, right?
Yeah,
but
your leverage changed.
Your leverage changed. And I think that this show Suits does a great job incorporating leverage and relative leverage, and showing possible outcomes as a result. Maybe played a little bit fast and loose with the fact that this is potentially blackmail or extortion.
Yeah, or even better, the client shouldn't receive a lower settlement because of malfeasance.
Great point.
Yeah, by the attorney. I think that's, for me, that was the thing that was ringing the most true, which is like the fact that he maybe tampered with a witness or extorted someone or blackmailed someone. That claim shouldn't impact this settlement negotiation.
To the point that I think you would have an incredibly strong legal malpractice case against the firm for exactly $7.5 million.
And you would absolutely move Lewis out of that trial, that claim.
Yeah.
One of the other pieces about the settlement negotiation that I thought was kind of interesting, and I'd love to get your take on, is they lowball. Let's call it a lowball offer. Harvey and Lewis without the client in the room, and Harvey says, "There's no way we are going to take that offer." Walks out of the room, but then also says to the client, "I have to disclose the offer to you." Break that down for me a little bit.
Yeah, so you wouldn't be able to turn the offer down in the room without already having authority from the client.
Okay.
You have a duty to convey offers to the client. The attorney, generally speaking, is responsible for legal strategy in making legal decisions, whereas the client is the ultimate decider of, these substantive decisions, like whether or not that's an outcome that they want to take.
They may weigh heavily the lawyer's opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you have a good lawyer that you trust, or somebody you are willing to hire in the first place, I would strongly advise considering their opinion on the matter. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the client's call.
Totally.
And so he would have an obligation to convey the offer, which they showed. He wouldn't have the ability to just tell them no flat out. Again, unless he had prior authorization from the client. So he could have gotten, you have no authority to accept an offer below X amount, or, put it to your judgment, but you have authority to accept any offer above Y amount.
Yeah. So I guess to me, it's just interesting, like the dance they're playing there, who has authority in litigation matters. It probably feels a lot like, the lawyer is in charge, but ultimately the client is in charge of these kind of substantive decisions.
One other thing that came up here was this intertwining of the criminal and the civil matter yet again. And so at the ultimate resolution, they settled the case for $150 million.
Yep.
I would argue that's even cheap. I think that at this point there was the lost use of the funds. There were,
attorney's fees.
There were all of these damages exceeding $150 million. To put them in the position they were before these funds were embezzled, $150 million isn't going to cut it.
Agreed.
So setting that aside, as they settle the case for $150 million, they address the criminal charges.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts here?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately the criminal side, the crime is against the state or the people of the U.S. if it's a federal crime, or the people of New York if it's a New York crime. So the civil litigant doesn't really have the same authority to tell, the prosecutor's office, don't go after this crime. The prosecutor may take that under advisement. They may say, hey, we don't have a this person may not cooperate as a witness. They don't really want to do it. So what's the purpose behind going after these people? But the prosecutor may say, these criminals are out there doing it to other people. We need to stop this action from happening. Even though this person felt like they were made whole, it doesn't mean that either the other people who potentially could be being defrauded or embezzled are getting their money back, or that in the future these people may not feel emboldened to act to take those criminal actions.
Absolutely. And you even get into a situation where you potentially have issues with extortion or bribery by claiming that you would set aside, or you would otherwise, tank the criminal prosecution against them.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, and that's a real issue that comes up. And so the intertwining these two issues is very messy. They don't have any authority to not bring criminal charges. The prosecutor would certainly consider whether or not restitution has already been made, or if they made the person whole and they tried to undo their wrongdoing. But yeah, exactly. It's ultimately not within their control.
There's one final point that I'd like to get your take on, which is the Lewis, we alluded to it earlier, the Lewis-Harvey relationship. It felt like it was closing.
So close.
It was so close. At the very end, Harvey's giving Lewis credit, and then they walk out and Lewis said, you were in there taking all the credit from me. And Harvey responds with something like, you would do that, and that's your problem. Yeah.
He's first defensive and says it's absolutely not what I did.
Yeah.
And we saw the scene immediately preceding that where he was in fact giving Lewis credit. Yeah. And there was this kumbaya moment where You thought it was going to be
great. We thought we'd done it.
And Lewis was walking down the hallway, like being incredibly charismatic, and you thought he'd kind of warmed up to the world a little bit. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that line. Stuck out to me, and I think was like it was great writing and showed a lot of insight into the human condition, where it's like, oh, he's just so horribly suspicious of the world because that's what he would do.
Yeah, to be honest, though, even though it feels like they didn't actually convene, it gives the opening for because Harvey doesn't just absolutely admonish him. It gives the opening for him to be like, oh, you're right, I should be viewing this differently.
Yeah, totally. And so I'm curious to see how that plays out. But
okay, so the next one we want to talk about is let's call it colloquially theft, that Lola Jensen perpetrates against her father's company.
Yeah, so okay, we have the elements of theft, and then we have theft by deception, which I think is what we see playing out in this episode.
Yep.
So really quickly, Lola Jensen uses a fake ID to funnel payments from Clarity Drilling, which is her father's company, to another company, this fake entity that she's set up.
Yep.
She's stolen a few $1 million. We don't know exactly how much, but
we don't know exactly how. Like, she must be putting out like purchase orders or something like that, and the CFO is just paying them.
She's doing it under this moral stand where trying to bring about more climate justice.
Yeah.
We also it's happening. It seems as a way to lash out against her father.
Yeah.
It's a complicated situation, but in terms of the legal elements of theft, we have either wrongfully taking, obtaining, or withholding by any means from the possession of the owner or any other person money, personal property, or an article of value with intent to permanently deprive the person of the thing that you've taken.
Yeah.
So that's larceny, which is, this crime that we're going to lump under theft.
Yep.
Then we also have wrongful appropriation, which is essentially the same elements, but with the intent to temporarily deprive. In this episode, we see that she's taken the money, but she hasn't distributed it yet. And so we've got this tension between whether or not she had this intent to permanently deprive or this intent to temporarily deprive. And I think that the defense attorney would have a strong claim arguing here that there was this intent to temporarily deprive.
Yeah, which I guess the idea is either one is a violation of a crime.
Absolutely.
Or is the commission of a crime.
Yeah.
So I guess what the distinction would be to that one would be a lesser crime. Is that the idea?
Even more germane or even more relevant in what we see play out in the episode is if she has the ability to set right her wrongdoing, the outcome is going to be very different. The prosecutor is going to treat it very differently, most likely, and practically the consequences will be very different.
The plea deal will look different if she hasn't stolen the money for good. If there's a way to make it right, it's still a crime.
It's still a crime either way.
And frankly, I think it would be hard to argue that she didn't have the permanent. She even admits to Mike that she was planning to distribute it to other places. So at the time she was taking it, which is the time that they're going to measure the intent to permanently deprive, she was planning to, I think it's arguable that she was trying to permanently deprive the company.
Arguably very hard for the prosecution to prove the intent
without Mike.
Yeah. But that might be neither here nor there. And they would certainly have, anytime you're taking a bunch of money, I think a consequence of the fact that it's happened, that you've taken the money, there's a strong argument for an intent to deprive permanently.
Yeah, I agree. They're not going to have an uphill battle.
You have to prove, as the prosecutor, you have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard is not beyond all possible doubt, not beyond a shadow of a doubt, not necessarily beyond all imaginary doubt.
Yeah.
You have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So at the end of the day, you would have 12 jurors using their common sense, and anytime you're taking substantial sums of money.
All right, so then let's jump into theft by deception, which is a concept in the Model Penal Code. The Model Penal Code is a project of the American Law Institute, but effectively they're trying to create a code section that they think is indicative of the best version of the penal code or the criminal law section of a state's code. And they try to get a bunch of states to adopt all or some part of the code. So this is a good analogy for the version of the code that is widely adopted.
Some states have adopted the model penal code in its entirety, I believe, or at least close to it.
So we just got done with larceny. The model penal code has this concept called theft by deception, is a crime where a person is guilty of theft if he purposely obtains property of another by deception. There are a bunch of versions of deception, and the statute kind of lists out a few examples of it. I don't think it's meant to be exhaustive. But one of them is fails to correct a false impression which the deceiver previously created or reinforced, or which the deceiver knows to be influencing another to whom he stands in a fiduciary confidential relationship.
So creating a fake company, perfect example of this.
Yeah, a fake company with a fake ID so that no one knows it's Lola Jensen, who is the daughter of the CEO. She fully knows what she's doing as she's trying to steal funds.
Yeah, so I think that sets this up well enough. And back to the episode, what did we see play out here? So she created this fake company. She has committed this crime of theft by deception. And she has a couple $1 million that she hasn't distributed, but which she has taken.
They use her as a tool to do two things. One, to make Mike squirm. Two, well, a few things rather, not just two. One, to make Mike squirm. Two, to give Mike a role as a fixer and to kind of keep him busy throughout the episode. And then
also to create Mike's new brand as Casanova.
Yeah. 3, to create Mike's new brand as Casanova, and 4, to solve Mike's Harvard problem.
Yep.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of situation. I don't think there's really a resolution here because we don't know
the theft by deception.
Theft by deception. I think, frankly, she would be guilty of the crime. It sounds like she made up with her dad and they figured something out. I wonder if it's her repaying the money. The crime still occurred, right? Yeah. So that's a unique kind of situation. Again, to your point, how a prosecutor views it is maybe I don't want to go after a crime that's already been solved, or
maybe I have a hard time proving that there was this intent to permanently deprive, but then even if it was temporarily, we probably still have a crime there.
Yeah.
The wrongful appropriation. So
yeah, so I don't think she's off the hook. What about you?
I don't think she's off the hook in a technical sense, not even close. I think practically, and for the purposes of the episode, she's got off clean.
Scot-free.
Yeah,
scot-free. Is it scot-free or scot-free?
Beats me, Joe.
Oh, damn.
Back to the point about Lola's role in the episode. He's got this, much more fail-safe backstory now.
Oh, it's unbelievable. To be honest, all my anxiety about him getting caught is kind of out the window.
Yeah, it's kind of fallen by the wayside. And they left this possibility open where she explicitly says, this could come up again, but it won't be for lack of a backstory.
Yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. She did say that. So that's foreshadowing to some degree. We
also have the whole other matter of, graduating from Harvard Law School doesn't make you an attorney.
I agree with that. He does mention in an earlier episode that he took when I was studying for the bar exam, as if he had already taken the bar exam. So maybe he's got something there.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
But yeah, that largely assuaged my fears and my background anxiety.
And I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then as far as Lola as a love interest, do you think that goes anywhere? She come back into the episode?
I think, well, here's a better question because I came up with it.
I was just about to say I disagree before I hear the question.
Is Lola the best match for Mike? And I kind of think she's whiny and a little bit
incredibly
of a baby.
Smart and capable,
self-righteous. I think she is.
They might be perfect for each other.
So the answer...
It's funny you'd say that because I was actually thinking about the relationship between Mike and Harvey almost as like a father-son relationship. He's certainly his mentor, but it almost transcends that to the point of he's in it with Mike about whether or not he gets found out. Not in the way a boss would be, but in the way, family would be.
Well, agree. And to be honest, every time Harvey kind of giggles or laughs off Mike being a little brat,
it
reminds me of what our father would tell us, which is like, you know how much, glass I had to chew from the two of you? Like, get real. I'm always just turning the other cheek.
Totally. And I thought about that in the exact scene whenever Mike walks into his office, is like whining about his Harvard backstory and how he's going to get found out. And then says like, Harvey's like, don't worry about it. Come help me solve this. And he says, like, why don't you fix your own problems? And he walks out of the office and Harvey just chuckles.
He just chuckles. Yeah. He's like, oh, boys will be boys. Turns out he's an adult though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, so I think this episode, tons of legal issues came up.
Yeah. We didn't even cover all of them, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, there was bribing a witness potentially. There was
potential blackmail or extortion.
Yeah.
Ethical standards.
Yeah. For lawyers and standards that they have to hold themselves to. But I think that kind of wraps up this episode. What do you think?
I think so too.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun. This was episode 8 of Suits on Suits. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Please like, subscribe, follow us.
Throw some comments in the comment section. Let us know what you want to see more of, or how we could provide more useful information.
Sounds great. See you next time.
See you then.